Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 7 quarterback rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're talking everything related to the quarterback position, starting off with matchups, talking about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. After that, we'll talk about my top 16 quarterback rankings going into Week 7, giving you guys a little bit of my perspective and opinion on the matter. Before we begin, if you are looking for a specific player, you can go down into the description of the video, find timestamps down below. If you have not yet already, while you're down there in the description, make sure you click the subscribe button. For those of you who have not yet already, we are on our way to 32,000. I really do appreciate you guys supporting the channel. So if you have not yet already, click the subscribe button. We're making 2020 fantasy football content here on the daily for the entirety of the season. Tomorrow will be hidden gems. Earlier today, we put out a tight end video. And later this week on Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, kickoff with Kirchhoff, talking about setting lineups, adjusted rankings, all that kind of jazz, answering questions on Sunday morning. Outside of that, make sure you leave a like on today's video. Really do appreciate trying to get past 1,000 likes every single day on every video. Would be a great feat for us to accomplish on a daily basis. I appreciate those of you who already go about doing that. Outside of that, make sure you leave a comment, and let's get into this, shall we? Talking about the quarterback position going into Week 7, of course, let's start off with matchups at said position. So as you can see on screen, the Atlanta Falcons are giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks thus far this season, giving up almost 350 yards and 3 touchdowns per game. 29.91 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. That's absolutely ridiculous, but it certainly helps the favor and the potential cause for playing Matthew Stafford this upcoming week. Of course, that offense has been struggling in the passing game. They had an incredible game on the ground with Adrian Peterson and DeAndre Swift this past week. But again, if Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, and Danny Amendola, TJ Hawkinson can step up, that offense throughout the passing game could be a huge threat in a back and forth shootout in that matchup. Now, the Seattle Seahawks, of course, they've given up a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks this season. Kyler Murray should be able to take advantage of that himself, whether it's through the air or on the ground. The kid has been incredible, so that matchup's a pretty exciting one. The Los Angeles Chargers playing against Gardner Minshew. Gardner's been a little bit iffy as of late, but again, there's always a potential of him stepping up in a very advantageous matchup. The New Orleans Saints giving up 3 passing touchdowns per game to opposing quarterbacks. The last time we saw their defense, they had Justin Herbert throw for 4 on them. So again, that is something to keep an eye on. Teddy Bridgewater, who has played pretty well against his counterparts in the NFC South, could have himself a pretty good contest here and a little bit of a revenge game going back against New Orleans. The Buffalo Bills have themselves, of course, Sam Darnold's not going to have a great game, but we throw that out there. The Minnesota Vikings, another one of these teams. But again, let's remember the Minnesota Vikings, the Baltimore Ravens, Indianapolis Colts, and Miami Dolphins are all on bye week this week, so they do not count, and they will not be mentioned. The Tennessee Titans, the Dallas Cowboys, Denver Broncos, Washington football team, all other teams within the top 10 giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks thus far this season on average in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. Now, in terms of what matchups we might want to be avoiding this upcoming week, the teams that aren't really giving up many points to opposing quarterbacks, the Chicago Bears, number 1. Again, I mentioned this earlier this week when I talked about Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. Jared Goff, in the last 2 contests against the Chicago Bears, once in 2018 and once in 2019, has totaled for 0 passing touchdowns and 5 interceptions against that defense. That defense is one of the top 4 in the National Football League right now, up there with the Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh Steelers, and of course the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they're getting after it. It's just a matter of whether or not the Chicago Bears can continue to just force him to make mistakes. They probably will. They're giving up less than a single passing touchdown per game to opposing quarterbacks. So I think there is a very good chance that this defense is going to force a little bit of trouble for Jared Goff. I'm trying to avoid him this week, potentially. The Indianapolis Colts, Tampa Bay Buccaneers playing against Derek Carr. Derek Carr has been pretty good, 2 to 3 passing touchdowns every single week for the last 4 weeks. That's a pretty good thing to see from Derek Carr. But again, what are we going to potentially see from that offense? How are their offensive line going to, produce? Are they going to be playing against that ferocious defensive line that was imposing their will against Aaron Rodgers and that Green Bay offensive line? Kind of keep an eye on that. The Carolina Panthers playing against Drew Brees. I think Drew Brees will be fine, but it's just going to be a matter of whether or not Michael Thomas can play this upcoming week. The New York Giants playing against Carson Wentz. The New England Patriots playing against Jimmy Garoppolo. Pittsburgh Steelers playing against the Tennessee Titans and Ryan Tannehill, a guy that has been absolutely fire as of late. I saw a side-by-side image of the comparison between the last 19 games that Ryan Tannehill has played and Lamar Jackson has played, and they are very similar in the passing game. And Ryan Tannehill, to be honest, has just been more efficient and just been an incredible play as of late. But regardless, those are a little bit of the matchups going into Week 7. of the 2020 fantasy football season, giving you some perspective as to which players you might want to avoid and play this upcoming week. Now that we've kind of covered that, we can go ahead and we can start talking about my top 16 quarterback rankings for week 7. Starting off with my number 1, a guy coming off of the bye week, Russell Wilson. Regardless of whether or not they're signing Antonio Brown or all this information that's coming out, Russell Wilson is still going to be the best fantasy quarterback going forward. He has 19 passing touchdowns thus far this season in the 5 games that he's played. That's a 3.8 touchdown per game average for Russell Wilson. And the last time we saw him against the Minnesota Vikings, he had himself an incredible comeback late in that game to get them into the position to win. Absolutely incredible. The thing is, Russell Wilson is a must-play every single week, regardless of whether it's through the air or on the ground. I mean, the last time we saw him play, 58 rushing yards. The ability to make plays with your legs, get extra points, score through the air as well as they have. DK Metcalf is a touchdown every single week. Chris Carson's been playing fantastic in the passing game. It just seems like this offense has really clicked this year, and there's no complaint. Playing against Arizona, sure, they've been one of the better defenses this year in terms of being able to get a little bit better coverage. I know Chandler Jones missing is definitely going to be a big problem for that defense going forward, but regardless, Russell Wilson's always played well against that defense. They're a division rival. He'll be able to figure it out. He's my number 1 this week. Speaking of their division rival, and speaking of that matchup, Kyler Murray's my number 2. Again, Kyler Murray, even with 37.5% passing completion percentage this last week against the Dallas Cowboys. I think it was 9 for 24 passing. It was horrid numbers for Kyler Murray. He still had himself 188 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, but the biggest factor, the biggest difference for Kyler Murray this season has been his rushing ability. 74 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown against the Dallas Cowboys this past Monday night. As of right now, Kyler Murray is on pace to have 1,000 rushing yards by the end of the season. If all goes well and all goes according to plan and he's staying as consistent as how he's been playing, he's going to surpass that mark. He's going to be another one of these quarterbacks in the last couple of years to get it done on the ground. And even with how successful they were and how many points they were up, it doesn't matter for Kyler Murray because at times defenses aren't respecting their pass rush lanes and they're just letting him go. They're designing plays. They're pulling out 3 blockers ahead of him on some pulling plays that are designed quarterback runs for him. You've got offensive linemen pulling, tight ends pulling, and even running backs going and lead blocking for him. So everything's just designed for him. This last week, 28.92 fantasy points. He's one of the best fantasy football quarterbacks as of right now, and it's only getting better for him considering the Seattle matchup. Again, we talked about it earlier in the week. They give up a lot of yards through the air and a lot of touchdowns. Should be exciting. We have ourselves Patrick Mahomes at number 3. Playing against Denver should be an easy matchup. I'm not complaining. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is as consistent as it's gotten at the quarterback position. Even though this past week, 2 passing touchdowns, 225 yards, 36 rushing yards. Even though that performance isn't blowing the doors off anybody, that's the consistent games that you're going to find when he's playing against AFC rivals like the Buffalo Bills. All in all, was a great performance. He plays, a team within their division, the Denver Broncos. The last time he played against them, had himself another 2 touchdown game. He should be perfectly fine. The upside's always there. Patrick Mahomes can always turn it on and turn into a 5 passing touchdown quarterback, but otherwise he's always going to be this consistent play where he's going to get himself his 2 passing touchdowns, the 3 passing touchdowns, will get himself more involved with his legs. I mean, we've seen it more this year than I've ever seen it. Patrick Mahomes' willingness to run the ball and willingness to run the ball on the goal line, get himself rushing touchdowns. That upside's incredible. This upcoming week should be a great play against Denver. We have ourselves Josh Allen at number 4. Of course, Josh Allen plays against the New York Jets. The last time he played against them, had himself 312 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 57 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. Unfortunately, fumbled up a couple times in that game, but since that game has kind of gotten away from running the ball. Just this past week, he had to get himself more involved in the running game because, of course, the Kansas City defense was really forcing him to struggle in the passing game, only having 122 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns. Of course, has turned over the ball 3 times in the last 2 weeks. He's got to be able to get back to the ground game, get himself a little bit more efficient in the passing game. And I think this upcoming week, the Jets will be a pretty good game to help himself recalibrate and have himself in a really favorable matchup. Just get more comfortable. John Brown's probably going to miss, so it's going to be Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley once again for him. Obviously, the running back play hasn't been the greatest. I know Devin Singletary has been struggling as of the last couple weeks. Zach Moss has been a no-show, but I think if Josh Allen continues to be their number one running option on top of being able to pass the ball, his fantasy value just goes through the roof going forward. Moving on to our next quarterback, we have ourselves Deshaun Watson at number 5. Now, Deshaun Watson this past week was the number 1 overall fantasy quarterback with 32 fantasy points in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. 4 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions, had himself 335 passing yards, 26 yards on the ground. Of course, we'd like to see more on the ground, but if he can continuously sit back and comfortably wait with the offensive line being able to protect him on a downly basis, it just seems like him getting, the job done through the air with Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks and Randall Cobb, Darren Fells, that he's gotten more comfortable with. It just seems like an automatic play right there in my eyes. Now, he plays against the Green Bay Packers. Thus far this season, in the contest that the Green Bay Packers have had, they've only had one quarterback put up less than 2 passing touchdowns against their defense this season. And that was Matt Ryan, who didn't get the memo that he should have played well against them in that Monday night game. Otherwise, every single quarterback playing against Green Bay this year has thrown for 2 minimum passing touchdowns. I think in this kind of a matchup, which it should be a back and forth shootout, of course, Deshaun Watson will get his 2 touchdowns, but I think he has the upside of 3 because, of course, the matchup is going to force him to score more and more often than he might want, because that Houston defense just hasn't been able to keep up or at least hold back opposing offenses this season. Speaking of the matchup, the Green Bay Packers taking on the Houston Texans. I think Aaron Rodgers is in line for one of the better weeks of his season. Of course, we've seen him have some fantastic weeks, 4 passing touchdowns, over 300 passing yards. But this last week was maybe the worst performance I've ever seen Aaron Rodgers produce. Only 160 passing yards through 2 interceptions to 0 passing touchdowns, had 3 fantasy points total. That's just embarrassing in my eyes. Of course, the Tampa Bay defense really got after him. The fact that David Bakhtiari, their left tackle, went out, and the fact that they couldn't run the ball because of how good that run-stopping defense is for Tampa Bay, it just kind of leaned in their favor, and they're built to really be able to handle Aaron Rodgers in this offense. So the question is, how does Aaron Rodgers react and be able to at least turn it around after losing to a team like Tampa Bay? I think Houston's the best bounce-back game they could possibly have. I mentioned it a little bit earlier this week, but just this past week, Tennessee completely destroyed Houston's defense. I mean, Derrick Henry did whatever he wanted on the ground. A.J. Brown had himself 2 receiving touchdowns. Adam Humphries, a surprise show up and had a great game. Even Johnny Smith going down. Anthony Firkser had himself an incredible performance. So it just seems to me that this defense just can't stop a soul. And to be honest, if Aaron Rodgers comes out, has a bounce-back game, he could potentially see himself with 3+ touchdowns this upcoming week in a very advantageous matchup. Matt Ryan's my number 7. Matt Ryan had a great week. 4 passing touchdowns, 371 passing yards. Just an incredible performance that I honestly did not expect to see. I was just hoping that Julio would come back and they would be decent. They were beyond decent. Of course, that defense turning or allowing Kirk Cousins just make mistake after mistake, forcing 3 turnovers, 3 interceptions early in the first half. That is the biggest difference maker, because it not only gives more opportunity for Matt Ryan, but it gets him more confidence and it gets him on the field quickly, scores often, and then he could just relax in the second half. And that's what they did. He had himself a 75% passing completion percentage this past week, and it just seems to me that this offense is now clicking. Playing against Detroit, we know that their struggles at the secondary has been something that has been a pretty big problem for them over the first half of the season, or the first quarter of the season, but it just seems to me that if Matt Ryan continues to just play at this level, he is going to find consistent production and fantasy points and become, continuously be a guy that we can at least rely upon on a weekly basis. There was a couple weeks there he wasn't throwing touchdowns. He got back on track this past week. I'm excited about his potential against Detroit. Moving on to our number 8, we have ourselves Justin Herbert. Now, I've been mentioning his name for the last couple of weeks for a reason. I wanted you guys to pick him up because the matchups on hand going forward are going to be incredible. Playing against Jacksonville this week is an automatic play, of course. I know Matthew Stafford wasn't able to have better than 11 fantasy points last week against them, but to be honest, Justin Herbert is a different animal and has been just airing it out on a weekly basis. Has thrown 7 passing touchdowns in the last 2 games he played against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and, of course, the New Orleans Saints on Monday Night Football Week 5. So, again, Justin Herbert has been on fire. This offense continuing to have to pass the ball. I mean, sure, Jacksonville just gave up a boatload of yards on the ground to DeAndre Swift and Adrian Peterson, but it just seems to me that this offense is kind of being predicated on just passing the ball. With the return of Brian Bulaga, the right tackle, and Try Turner, the right guard, it just seems like we're going to get more protection for Justin Herbert. We're going to get more utilization of Mike Williams, Hunter Henry, Keenan Allen as the weeks progress. This just seems like automatic points in my eyes, and that's why I have him at number 8. Number 9 is Matthew Stafford. He plays against the Atlanta Falcons. We just saw what Kirk Cousins was able to do. Kirk Cousins threw 3 interceptions in the first half, then somehow turned it around and had himself a very profitable fantasy week in terms of touchdowns, passing yardage, all that kind of stuff. It didn't even matter because the turnovers, sure, they were a little bit of a blemish on his entire record for the day. But the fact of the matter is that Atlanta Falcons defense is not perfect. They're going to give up yardage. And I think the fact that they've given up on average 345 yards and 3 passing touchdowns every single week to opposing offenses just continues to, give us more confidence in playing quarterbacks against them every single week, regardless of who it is. So Matthew Stafford, sure, you haven't been the best as of the last couple of weeks. Didn't really need to be utilized very much considering the run game was such a dominant force last week against Jacksonville. But I think Matthew Stafford is my number 9. Just seems like a guy that is in one of the better matchups as a good streaming option this week. Number 10 is Ryan Tannehill, a guy that, in my opinion, should be in the conversation for MVP. He's really turned this organization around, has really allowed them to just kind of flourish in the last couple seasons. The way I see it, with Ryan Tannehill playing against Houston last week and coming back in the game, 364 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, taking them to overtime and moving that team down the field on a consistent basis. Playing against Pittsburgh doesn't seem like it's going to be something of a difficulty for him. Let's not forget the Pittsburgh Steelers, they've been torched over the last couple of weeks by opposing quarterbacks. Every quarterback they've played this season, except for Baker Mayfield, has thrown for 2 touchdowns against them. So again, they always have their weakness in the secondary. Of course, Baker Mayfield didn't get the memo, didn't want to show up this past week, but I still think that Ryan Tannehill, when in fact this team can't run the ball and they're forced to pass the ball, is going to take over this game. He's going to push the Pittsburgh defense to the limit. And I think getting back Corey Davis, having a Jonnu Smith, who I just got the report on my phone a little bit earlier, had a full practice today, just seems like it's going to be a pretty good opportunity for Ryan Tannehill to prove himself within this AFC division. Moving on, Ben Roethlisberger on the other side of that matchup, I still think that Tennessee's defense is awful. If Deshaun Watson can show up and throw for 335 and 4 passing touchdowns against you, I can't wait to see what Ben Roethlisberger is going to be able to do. Of course, this last week wasn't able to find much because they were up 30 points really quickly on Cleveland's team. So the fact of the matter is that sure, Ben Roethlisberger is going to come out this week. They're going to run the ball as consistently as they've ever done, but they have so many weapons at the receiver position. So Juju, Claypool, who's just stepped up. Deontay Johnson will come back. James Washington is somehow always producing in that offense. You have Eric Ebron. He has so much talent surrounding him. Maybe he gets David DeCastro back at the right guard position this upcoming week, who was missing this last week. And then you have yourselves a fully functioning offense that in a back and forth matchup should be scoring a lot. Just looking at what the Tennessee Titans have given up to opposing quarterbacks, and thus far this season on average, 285 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. I think Ben Roethlisberger can easily get to 303 this upcoming week. That's why he sits at number 11 within our top 12. Carson Wentz is my number 12. A lot of people might be, questioning why I have Carson Wentz here. I think Carson Wentz is a really good quarterback. Sure, he has no talent surrounding him. Sure, everybody in that offense is hurt. But the thing that separates Carson Wentz from any of these other quarterbacks is his determined nature to just, no matter what, against all odds, I'm going to produce. And in fantasy, he has been a complete monster. In the last 4 weeks straight, he's had at least 2+ touchdowns in fantasy. A lot of rushing touchdowns on top of a couple QB sneaks. Jason Kelce, of course, the center of the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the best centers in terms of just being able to cut the nose guard right in front of him and get Carson Wentz into the end zone regardless. I think despite the matchup against the New York Giants, the New York Giants versus the Philadelphia Eagles have beaten them 7 times in a row. The Philadelphia Eagles Thursday night are 5-0 under Doug Peterson. This is a team that is going to have a bounce back week. They've competed heavily with the Pittsburgh Steelers, the San Francisco 49ers, which they beat, of course, and the Baltimore Ravens. These are 3 great teams that they've played against. Playing against Danny Dimes and the New York Giants shouldn't be a struggle for them. I think regardless of the fact that Ertz is out, Dallas Goedert's out, they don't have Alshon Jeffrey, they will get Lane Johnson back. Even with Miles Sanders out, I still think Carson Wentz is going to be able to take over this game. He's got enough pieces, and he's proven that he doesn't need a lot surrounding him to be able to get the job done. Number 13 is Teddy Bridgewater. Now again, you play against the New Orleans Saints. This is another defense that is giving up 250 passing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks and 3 passing touchdowns on average per week to opposing quarterbacks. So it just seems to me that Teddy Bridgewater, even though he had a bit of a struggle, a little bit of a setback against the Chicago Bears, the defense in the NFC South with the New Orleans Saints isn't something that I'm afraid of, and I'm sure that this Carolina Panthers offense is afraid of. So they're definitely going to get after them. DJ Moore has had great success against them. Robbie Anderson has been a huge, a part of this offense in the last couple of weeks. You get more utilization out of Robbie Anderson and Mike Davis out of the backfield in terms of a receiving option, and Teddy Bridgewater should be another one of these automatic plays as a potential streaming option this upcoming week. We have ourselves Cam Newton. Now, Cam Newton, even though he threw 2 interceptions, he was still pretty efficient with the ball. Of course, he took too many sacks, had himself 157 passing yards. But the biggest difference maker for Cam Newton is the fact that, like I've mentioned, he's averaging about 50 rushing yards per game and a rushing touchdown every single game. That in itself and an extra 11-point swing makes the biggest difference. This past week against the Denver Broncos, 76 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. I don't think that anybody can really stop him in his pursuit of the end zone, running the ball. So it just kind of seems to me that Cam Newton is probably in line for another decent game against San Francisco. The offense will be able to produce a little bit better in terms of the passing game. I can assure you that. Of course, they were a little bit rusty going into this past week with having them miss a week. But I think Cam Newton will get back on track as my number 14. Moving on to our number 15, we have ourselves Tom Brady. I have a lot of confidence in Tom Brady. Even in matchups like last week against Green Bay, they were just winning by a buttload of points. He still had himself 2 passing touchdowns, 166 passing yards. Got himself more involved with Gronk. Now that you have Chris Godwin back, has had another game under his belt, can now at least feel fully healthy against the Las Vegas Raiders. A guy like Mike Evans last week was still dealing with injury. Hopefully, he had some time off, has been limited this week, and can have a full week this upcoming Sunday against the Raiders. It just seems to me like this offense is continuing to get more and more chemistry, and Tom Brady is just a matter of time until he has another one of those big games. He had a big game against the Los Angeles Chargers a couple weeks back. I think another one of those kind of games could be in line this upcoming week for him as the offense continues to come together. The last quarterback option I wanted to mention is Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, the last time we saw him against Cleveland was a Thursday night matchup. He had 61 passing attempts, had himself over 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. That in itself, a great number to see. This past week had 313 passing yards against the Indianapolis Colts defense. Wasn't able to get himself a passing touchdown, but scored a rushing touchdown early in the first quarter until they threw the lead. I think Cleveland's secondary has got so many problems at this point in terms of injuries that regardless of what Cleveland's going to be bringing to the table, I think the injuries that they're facing offensively and defensively kind of give Joe Burrow a window of opportunity to come in, make some plays early, and potentially swing this game in his direction. So the utilization of course, Tyler Boyd, and then now more recently, T. Higgins and AJ Green, just seems to me like this is just a game where Joe Burrow could truly take over. Of course, the last time we saw Joe Burrow play against Cleveland, the tight end position was a big deal with CJ Uzomah, Drew Sample. Maybe we get a little bit more utilization from Drew Sample and find ourselves having a good week with Joe Burrow. Either way, those are my top 16 quarterback rankings for this upcoming week. Thank you everybody for watching. Make sure you leave a like button down below if you like today's video. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet already. Later tomorrow, Hidden Gems, we'll talk about a couple sleepers for this upcoming week going into week 7 of the 2020 season. Thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, if you haven't checked out my tight end video, go check that out. I'll see you guys. Peace.